The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine lawns of Windsor Castle as Prince William adjusted his tie one final time before stepping into what would become one of the most pivotal moments of his royal career. The weight of the decision he was about to announce had kept him awake for weeks, but, today, there was no turning back. The choice he had made would not only reshape the monarchy but would send shockwaves through the very foundations of the royal family. Catherine stood beside him in their private chambers, her gentle hand resting on his shoulder as she offered the quiet support that had sustained him through countless challenges. Their children's laughter echoed from the garden below, a reminder of what truly mattered and what he was fighting to protect. The future of the monarchy wasn't just about tradition anymore, it was about creating something meaningful for the next generation. "Are you certain about this?" Catherine asked softly, though she already knew the answer. She had watched her husband wrestle with this decision for months, seeing the toll it had taken on him as he balanced duty with his own moral compass. The sleepless nights, the long conversations that stretched into the early hours of morning, the careful research and consultation with trusted advisors had all led to this moment. William nodded, his jaw set with determination. The decision he was about to announce would strip away decades of protocol and challenge the established order that had governed the royal family for generations. It would position him as a modernizing force within an institution often criticized for being out of touch with contemporary values. More importantly, it would signal his intention to lead with his own principles rather than simply following the path laid out by those who came before him. The palace staff had been buzzing with nervous energy all morning, sensing that something significant was about to unfold but unsure of exactly what. Whispered conversations filled the corridors as speculation ran wild among those closest to the royal circle. Even the most seasoned courtiers, who prided themselves on being privy to palace secrets, found themselves in the dark about William's intentions. In her apartment at Clarence House, Queen Camilla was enjoying what she believed would be another routine day of royal engagements. The morning briefings had revealed nothing unusual, and her schedule was filled with the typical mixture of charity events and ceremonial duties that had become second nature to her. The irony wasn't lost on those who knew what was coming, that she was planning to spend the afternoon reviewing plans for upcoming state functions that would soon be dramatically altered by William's announcement. Camilla had grown comfortable in her role as queen consort, having worked tirelessly to rehabilitate her public image following the tumultuous years after Diana's death. She had earned a grudging respect from many who had initially viewed her with suspicion, and she had begun to see herself as a stabilizing force within the family. The morning newspapers lay scattered across her breakfast table, filled with the usual mixture of royal coverage and society gossip, none of which hinted at the storm that was about to break. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in California, Prince Harry was starting his day with his usual routine of meditation and exercise, unaware that his brother was preparing to make a decision that would affect him profoundly. The brothers had barely spoken in recent months, their relationship remaining strained despite occasional attempts at reconciliation. Harry had found peace in his new life with Meghan and their children, but the wounds from their royal exit remained fresh, and the distance between the brothers seemed to grow wider with each passing month. The irony of timing wasn't lost on those few palace insiders who knew what was coming. Harry had spent years advocating for modernization within the royal family, often clashing with tradition and protocol in ways that had ultimately led to his departure. Now his brother was about to implement changes that might have prevented the rift between them, but the timing seemed cruelly late. Back at Windsor, William's private secretary knocked gently on the door, announcing that the media had assembled and everything was ready for the announcement. The gathered journalists sensed they were about to witness something significant, though none could have predicted the magnitude of what William was preparing to reveal. The usual suspects from the royal press corps were present, their cameras and recording equipment ready to capture what many would later describe as a watershed moment in modern royal history. As William made his way toward the location where he would address the nation, his mind wandered to conversations with his father from years past. King Charles had often spoken about the burden of balancing personal conviction with royal duty, but had rarely acted upon his own instincts when they conflicted with established protocol. William had watched his father struggle with this tension for decades, and he was determined not to repeat the pattern of compromise that had left so many important issues unaddressed. The decision William was about to announce had been years in the making, though the final catalyst had come during a private conversation with Catherine just 3 weeks earlier. She had posed a simple question that had crystallized everything for him: What kind of monarchy did he want to leave for their children? The answer had been immediate and clear, even if the path to achieving it would be complex and controversial. The royal protection officers who accompanied William that morning noticed an unusual lightness in his step, despite the gravity of what lay ahead. Those who knew him well recognized this as a sign that he had found peace with a difficult decision. The weight that had pressed down on his shoulders for months seemed to have lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose that energized everyone around him. In the private quarters where senior royals often gathered for informal discussions, the atmosphere was unusually subdued. Several family members had sensed that something significant was brewing, though none had been given advance warning of William's plans. The carefully maintained facade of royal unity was about to be tested in ways that would reveal deep philosophical divisions within the family about the future direction of the monarchy. Queen Camilla's morning routine included a review of the day's media coverage, a habit she had developed to stay informed about public perception of the royal family. As she scanned the headlines, nothing suggested that her world was about to be turned upside down. The coverage was typical of any ordinary day, focused on upcoming engagements and minor ceremonial matters that seemed utterly trivial compared to what was about to unfold. The staff at Clarence House went about their duties with their usual efficiency, preparing for what they assumed would be another standard day in the life of the Queen Consort. The irony would later strike many of them that they had spent the morning preparing for events that would be overshadowed or potentially cancelled entirely by William's announcement. As the appointed time approached, William took a final moment to center himself before stepping into the spotlight. The decision he was about to announce represented more than just a policy change, it was a declaration of independence from the constraints that had bound the monarchy for generations. He was about to signal that the next generation of royals would chart their own course, regardless of how uncomfortable that might make those who preferred the familiar patterns of the past. The assembled media representatives checked their equipment one final time, unaware that they were about to witness a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. The routine nature of their preparation belied the historic significance of what they were about to document. Later, many would describe feeling an unusual electricity in the air, though at the time it seemed like any other royal media event. Catherine watched from a window overlooking the area where William would make his announcement, her heart filled with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She knew that her husband was about to face criticism from some quarters, but she also believed deeply in the principles that had driven his decision. The strength of their partnership had been forged through numerous challenges, and she was prepared to stand by him through whatever controversy might follow. The clock tower at Windsor chimed the hour, and William stepped forward to address the assembled crowd and the millions who would hear his words through television and radio broadcasts around the world. The decision he was about to announce would not only shock Camilla and Harry but would also electrify supporters who had long hoped for exactly this kind of bold leadership from the next generation of royals. Unknown to most observers, several prominent figures in British society had been quietly advocating for exactly the kind of change William was about to announce. Their private conversations with him over recent months had helped reinforce his conviction that the time had come for dramatic action. The confluence of public opinion and private encouragement had created the perfect moment for the announcement he was about to make. As William began to speak, his voice carried the confidence of someone who had thoroughly considered every aspect of his decision and was prepared to defend it against any criticism. The words he was about to utter would mark a turning point not just for his own role within the royal family but for the institution itself. The monarchy was about to enter a new era, whether some of its members were ready or not. The words left Prince William's lips with a clarity and conviction that stunned even those who had suspected something significant was coming. Standing before the assembled media at Windsor Castle, he announced his decision to establish an entirely new framework for royal duties that would prioritize mental health advocacy, environmental protection, and youth empowerment above all traditional ceremonial functions. More shocking still was his declaration that participation in this new direction would be voluntary for all family members, but those who chose not to embrace these values would see their public roles and financial support significantly reduced. The immediate silence that followed his statement was deafening. Veteran royal correspondents, accustomed to carefully worded statements that revealed little, found themselves scrambling to process the magnitude of what they had just heard. This wasn't a minor policy adjustment or a diplomatic statement about future intentions. This was a fundamental restructuring of royal priorities that challenged centuries of established protocol. Within minutes, the news was spreading across social media platforms and news channels worldwide. The hashtag Royal Revolution began trending almost immediately as people shared their reactions to William's bold announcement. Supporters praised him for finally bringing the monarchy into the 21st century, while traditionalists expressed horror at what they saw as a betrayal of royal heritage and duty. In her private sitting room at Clarence House, Queen Camilla was informed of William's announcement by her private secretary, whose voice trembled slightly as he delivered the news. The teacup in her hand rattled against its saucer as the implications began to sink in. For someone who had spent years carefully rebuilding her reputation and finding her place within the royal structure, the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted in ways she couldn't have imagined. Camilla's first instinct was to call King Charles, but she quickly realized that he must have known about William's plans in advance. The thought that her husband might have supported this dramatic change without consulting her felt like a personal betrayal that cut deeper than any public criticism she had endured. She had believed their partnership was built on mutual respect and open communication, but now she questioned everything she thought she knew about her position within the family. The television in her sitting room displayed William's announcement on repeat, each viewing making the reality more difficult to accept. The confident way he had delivered his statement made it clear this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision but something he had been planning for months, possibly years. The careful preparation behind his words only emphasized how thoroughly she had been excluded from the process. Across the Atlantic, Prince Harry was jolted awake by the insistent buzzing of his phone as friends and former colleagues reached out to share the news. Still groggy from sleep, he initially thought there might be some emergency involving his father or another family member. As he read the news reports and watched video clips of his brother's announcement, a complex mixture of emotions washed over him that he struggled to process. Part of Harry felt vindicated by William's decision to prioritize the causes they had both cared about during their younger years together. The emphasis on mental health advocacy and environmental protection echoed many of the conversations they had shared before their relationship deteriorated. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to hope that this might represent an opportunity for reconciliation and a chance to work together on issues they both cared deeply about. But that hope was quickly tempered by the realization that William's announcement had come years too late to prevent the rift that had torn their family apart. If his brother had been willing to challenge royal protocol and prioritize meaningful causes earlier, Harry wondered whether he and Meghan might have found a way to remain working members of the royal family. The timing felt cruelly ironic, and the pain of what might have been was almost overwhelming. Meghan found Harry sitting in their kitchen, staring at his phone with an expression she had learned to recognize as the complex grief he felt whenever forced to confront his complicated relationship with his family of origin. She had watched him struggle with feelings of abandonment and frustration for years, and she could see that William's announcement was reopening wounds that had never fully healed. The media reaction to William's announcement grew more intense throughout the day as experts and commentators attempted to analyze the implications of his decision. Royal historians were divided in their assessments, with some praising his bold leadership while others warned that he was undermining the very foundations that had allowed the monarchy to survive for over 1,000 years. Public opinion polls conducted in the hours following the announcement revealed a stark generational divide in responses. Younger respondents overwhelmingly supported William's new direction, with many expressing excitement about a royal family that finally seemed relevant to their concerns about climate change and social justice. Older respondents were more skeptical, with many expressing concern that the monarchy was abandoning its constitutional role in favor of activism. The most shocking element of William's announcement for those within royal circles was his statement that family members would need to embrace these new priorities or face reduced roles and financial support. This represented an unprecedented challenge to the traditional model where royal status was determined by birth order and bloodline rather than commitment to specific causes or values. Senior palace staff found themselves in an impossible position as they tried to interpret what William's new framework would mean for their daily operations. Decades of established protocol would need to be rewritten, and nobody was quite sure how to navigate the transition period. The carefully choreographed machinery of royal life had suddenly been thrown into chaos, and everyone was looking for guidance that wasn't yet available. Queen Camilla spent much of the day in consultation with her closest advisors, trying to understand her options in this new reality. The thought of having her royal role diminished after years of hard work to establish her position was devastating, but the alternative of embracing William's agenda felt like a betrayal of her own values and the traditional approach she had worked so hard to master. Her advisors painted a stark picture of her choices: publicly support William's new direction and risk appearing opportunistic, or maintain her current approach and face the possibility of being marginalized within the family structure. Neither option felt acceptable, and she began to understand why William had chosen not to consult with family members before making his announcement. The international reaction to William's decision was equally polarized, with some Commonwealth nations expressing enthusiasm for a more engaged and activist royal family, while others worried about the political implications of royals taking strong stances on controversial issues. The delicate balance that had allowed the monarchy to maintain relationships across diverse political landscapes was suddenly under threat. In California, Harry found himself fielding calls from former colleagues and friends who wanted to know whether this development might lead to his return to royal duties. The questions forced him to confront feelings he had tried to bury about his decision to step away from royal life. The causes William was now prioritizing were exactly the ones Harry had been passionate about, and the irony wasn't lost on him that his brother was now championing the very approach that had caused tension when Harry had attempted it. The emotional toll of the day was evident in the exhaustion that showed on Camilla's face as evening approached. She had spent years believing she understood the rules of royal life, only to discover that those rules could be changed overnight by the next generation. The sense of security and belonging she had worked so hard to achieve felt fragile in ways she had never anticipated. Television news programs ran special reports throughout the evening, with royal experts attempting to predict the long-term implications of William's announcement. The consensus seemed to be that the monarchy would never be quite the same, though opinions varied wildly about whether this represented positive evolution or dangerous revolution. As the initial shock began to wear off, attention turned to how other family members would respond to William's ultimatum. Would they embrace his new direction, or would they choose to maintain their traditional approach at the cost of reduced prominence? The answers to these questions would determine not just individual futures but the overall trajectory of the royal family for generations to come. The day that had begun as routine had transformed into something historic, with repercussions that would continue to unfold for months or even years. William's bold move had indeed left Camilla and Harry shocked, but it had also electrified supporters and critics alike in ways that would reshape public discourse about the role of monarchy in modern society. The royal family would never be quite the same, and the world was watching to see what would happen next. The week following Prince William's groundbreaking announcement saw a series of private family meetings that would determine the future structure of the British royal family. The first of these took place in the oak-paneled library at Sandringham, where King Charles sat across from his eldest son, the weight of 3 generations of royal tradition hanging heavily in the air between them. The conversation that unfolded would reveal just how deeply William's decision had divided even his closest family members. Charles had initially been supportive of his son's passion for environmental causes and mental health advocacy, but the ultimatum aspect of William's announcement had caught him completely off guard. The king found himself in an impossible position, torn between admiration for his son's conviction and concern about the precedent being set for future generations. The monarchy had survived for over a millennium precisely because it had evolved gradually, adapting to changing times without abandoning its fundamental character. You've created a situation where family members must choose between their personal beliefs and their royal duties, Charles said quietly, his voice reflecting decades of his own struggles with that same tension. That's a burden no one should have to bear, and it's one that could tear us apart permanently. William's response revealed the depth of thought behind his decision and the pain it had caused him to reach this point. He spoke about watching his father compromise his own environmental convictions for decades in the name of royal neutrality, and how he had vowed never to put protocol ahead of the urgent issues facing the world. The passion in his voice was unmistakable, but so was the sadness at having to take such a dramatic step. The conversation stretched late into the evening, with both men trying to find a path forward that could preserve family unity while respecting William's determination to modernize the monarchy. But it became increasingly clear that some bridges had been burned and some relationships might never fully recover from the shock of William's unilateral decision. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla had spent the week in intense consultation with constitutional experts and public relations specialists, trying to understand her options in this new reality. The advice she received was uniformly sobering. She could either publicly embrace William's agenda and risk appearing insincere, or maintain her current approach and face gradual marginalization within the royal structure. The most difficult aspect of her situation was the realization that her years of careful reputation management might be rendered irrelevant overnight. She had worked tirelessly to transform herself from a figure of controversy into a respected member of the royal family, but William's new framework seemed to value ideological purity over the diplomatic skills she had developed. Her closest friend and advisor, the Duchess of Cornwall's former private secretary, painted a particularly stark picture of the challenges ahead. "The public will be watching to see how you respond," she warned. "If you embrace these causes too enthusiastically, they'll see it as opportunistic. If you don't embrace them enough, you'll be seen as resistant to change. There's no safe middle ground." The international media coverage of the royal family's internal tensions had reached fever pitch, with tabloid newspapers speculating wildly about private conversations and potential family splits. Foreign correspondents who had covered the royals for decades admitted they had never seen anything quite like the current situation, where fundamental questions about the monarchy's future were being debated so publicly and dramatically. In California, Prince Harry was struggling with his own complex emotions about his brother's decision. The causes William was now prioritizing were ones Harry had championed years earlier, often facing resistance from the very family members who would now be forced to embrace them or step aside. The vindication he felt was tempered by profound sadness at the timing and the missed opportunities for collaboration. Meghan watched her husband process these complicated feelings with the patience and understanding that had sustained their relationship through previous family crises. She understood that part of him was relieved to see the royal family finally embracing progressive values, while another part was heartbroken that it had taken his absence to make this change possible. The couple's evening conversations often returned to the question of whether this development might create an opportunity for reconciliation. Harry's relationship with William had been damaged by years of misunderstandings and hurt feelings, but their shared commitment to mental health advocacy and environmental protection had always been a potential bridge between them. However, reaching out to his brother would require Harry to swallow considerable pride and risk further rejection. The wounds from their last conversation were still fresh, and neither man had shown much inclination to take the first step toward reconciliation. The irony that they were now working towards similar goals from different continents wasn't lost on either of them. Back in London, other members of the royal family were grappling with their own responses to William's ultimatum. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense approach and dedication to duty, found herself in the unusual position of being caught between generations. Her instincts aligned more with traditional royal protocol, but she also respected William's right to chart his own course as the future king. The Princess Royal's response would be closely watched because of her reputation for independence and her practical approach to royal duties. If she chose to embrace William's new direction, it would lend significant credibility to his initiative. If she resisted, it might signal that his approach was too radical even for family members known for their progressive thinking. The younger generation of royals, including Zara Tindall and Peter Phillips, found themselves in an even more complex position. They had grown up with more freedom than their royal cousins but were still connected to the family through blood and tradition. William's announcement forced them to consider whether they wanted closer involvement with royal duties under his new framework or preferred to maintain their current distance from official responsibilities. Public opinion polls continued to show the same generational divide that had emerged immediately after William's announcement, but the numbers were shifting slightly as people had more time to consider the implications. Support among young people remained overwhelming, while older respondents showed some softening in their initial resistance as they began to understand William's motivations. The most unexpected development was the response from Commonwealth nations, many of which had been quietly hoping for exactly this kind of modernization from the royal family. Prime ministers and presidents who had maintained polite but distant relationships with the monarchy began expressing enthusiasm for a royal family that shared their priorities on climate change and social justice. This international support provided William with additional ammunition in his discussions with family members who remained resistant to change. He could now argue that his approach wasn't just popular with young Britons but was also strengthening relationships with Commonwealth nations that had grown skeptical of the monarchy's relevance. The business implications of William's decision were also becoming clear as major corporations and charitable organizations began reaching out to explore partnerships with the newly focused royal family. Environmental groups that had never considered royal patronage suddenly saw opportunities for unprecedented access and influence. Mental health organizations that had struggled for recognition found themselves with potential royal champions who were committed to their cause rather than simply fulfilling ceremonial obligations. Queen Camilla spent a particularly difficult evening reviewing these developments with her advisors, realizing that her previous approach to royal duties might become not just outdated but actively counterproductive. The charities and organizations she had supported were suddenly seen as less important than those aligned with William's priorities, and she faced the prospect of either abandoning relationships she had cultivated for years or being seen as irrelevant to the monarchy's future direction. The emotional toll of these realizations was evident in her increasingly haggard appearance and the reports from staff members who observed her struggling to maintain her usual composure. The woman who had weathered decades of public criticism and personal attacks was facing perhaps the greatest challenge of her royal career, and this time the threat came from within her own family rather than from external critics. As the third week after William's announcement drew to a close, it became clear that the royal family was approaching a point of no return. The initial shock was giving way to hard decisions that would reshape relationships and redefine roles for years to come. The monarchy that had seemed so stable and predictable just a month earlier was transforming into something entirely new, and nobody could predict with certainty what the final result would look like. The stage was set for confrontations and reconciliations that would determine not just individual futures but the overall trajectory of one of the world's oldest institutions. William's bold move had indeed shocked his family and the world, but the ultimate consequences were still unfolding as each family member grappled with choices that would define their relationships and their roles for generations to come. 3 months after Prince William's shocking announcement, the royal family gathered at Balmoral Castle for what would become known as the Summit of Reconciliation. The Scottish Highlands provided a fitting backdrop for conversations that would determine whether the House of Windsor could survive its greatest internal crisis in modern history. The autumn mist that clung to the mountains seemed to mirror the uncertainty that hung over every family member as they arrived for what might be their last gathering as a unified institution. Queen Camilla arrived at Balmoral with a decision that had taken her weeks to reach and would surprise everyone who thought they understood her character. After months of agonizing consultation with advisors and soul-searching conversations with King Charles, she had chosen to embrace William's new direction wholeheartedly. But her decision came with conditions that would test the sincerity of his commitment to family unity and collaborative leadership. The first private conversation between Camilla and William took place in the castle's library, where decades of royal decisions had been debated and resolved. Camilla's opening words surprised William with their directness and emotional honesty. "I've spent my entire adult life being criticized for my choices and having my motives questioned," she said quietly. "I won't allow this new chapter to become another source of public scrutiny about my authenticity or commitment." Her conditions were simple but profound. She would become one of the monarchy's leading advocates for domestic violence prevention and women's health issues, causes she had supported privately for years but never been allowed to champion publicly due to concerns about her past. In return, she wanted William's guarantee that her contributions would be valued and that she wouldn't be relegated to a supporting role simply because she wasn't born into these convictions. William's response revealed a maturity and humility that surprised even those who knew him best. He acknowledged that his announcement had been unnecessarily confrontational and that he should have included family members in the planning process rather than presenting them with an ultimatum. The conversation marked the beginning of a new partnership between two family members who had often misunderstood each other but shared more common ground than either had realized. The most emotional moment of the gathering came when Prince Harry arrived unexpectedly on the second day, having made the difficult decision to fly to Scotland without advance notice to avoid media speculation. His appearance shocked family members who hadn't seen him in person for over 2 years, and the physical changes in him were immediately apparent to everyone present. The reunion between William and Harry began awkwardly, with both brothers unsure how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. But the ice began to break when Harry acknowledged that William's new direction for the monarchy represented everything they had dreamed of achieving together during their younger years. "You did what I was too angry to do," Harry admitted. "You found a way to change the system from within instead of just walking away." William's response was equally emotional and revealing. He confessed that his brother's departure had forced him to confront the monarchy's shortcomings in ways he might never have done otherwise. Watching you leave made me realize that if we didn't change, we'd lose everyone who actually cared about making a difference, he said. Your decision to prioritize your family and your values over royal protocol was braver than anything I've done. The conversation between the brothers stretched through the night, covering years of misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and missed opportunities for connection. Both men acknowledged their role in the deterioration of their relationship, and both expressed regret about letting external pressures damage a bond that had sustained them through their mother's death and countless other challenges. But the path to reconciliation wasn't simple or immediate. Harry made it clear that his life in California with Meghan and their children remained his priority, and he wouldn't consider returning to royal duties unless he could do so on his own terms. William respected this position while expressing hope that they could find ways to collaborate on shared causes without requiring Harry to resume a formal royal role. The breakthrough moment came when Harry proposed creating an international foundation focused on mental health advocacy and environmental protection that could operate independently of the royal family while benefiting from their support and platform. This would allow him to contribute to the causes he cared about without the constraints of royal protocol, while giving William a way to extend the monarchy's influence beyond Britain's borders. The proposal excited both brothers in ways they hadn't experienced since their joint charity work years earlier. For the first time in years, they began talking about shared goals and mutual support rather than past grievances and fundamental differences. The foundation would become a symbol of their renewed partnership and a practical way to channel their combined passion for social change. King Charles watched these developments with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The reconciliation between his sons represented everything he had hoped for, but he also worried about the precedent being set for future generations. The monarchy had traditionally operated through careful consensus and gradual change, but his family was now embracing a more dynamic and potentially volatile approach to leadership. His own relationship with William had been strained by the unilateral nature of the original announcement, but he began to understand and even admire his son's willingness to risk everything for his convictions. The conversations at Balmoral helped Charles see that William's approach wasn't a rejection of royal tradition but rather an evolution that preserved the monarchy's core mission while adapting its methods to contemporary challenges. Princess Anne's response to the family reconciliation was characteristically practical and forward-thinking. She had initially been skeptical of William's dramatic approach, but the results spoke for themselves. The monarchy was suddenly relevant to young people in ways it hadn't been for decades, and international support for the institution was growing rather than declining. Her decision to embrace the new direction came with her own unique contribution, a focus on rural development and agricultural sustainability that drew on her decades of experience with farming and land management. This addition to the royal agenda demonstrated that William's framework was flexible enough to accommodate diverse interests while maintaining its core focus on urgent global challenges. The most surprising development was the response from Commonwealth nations, several of which proposed hosting royal visits specifically focused on the new agenda items. Caribbean nations that had been considering Republican movements suddenly expressed renewed interest in maintaining royal connections, while African countries began exploring partnerships with the newly focused monarchy on environmental and development issues. These international developments vindicated William's belief that modernization would strengthen rather than weaken the monarchy's global influence. The institution was becoming more relevant and respected precisely because it was willing to take stands on issues that mattered to people around the world rather than maintaining the studied neutrality that had characterized royal approaches for decades. The media coverage of the Balmoral gathering was unprecedented in its positivity, with even traditionally skeptical commentators acknowledging that the royal family seemed to have found a way to unite around shared values while respecting individual differences. The narrative of family dysfunction that had dominated headlines for years was replaced by stories of reconciliation and renewed purpose. Public opinion polls showed dramatic shifts in support for the monarchy, particularly among young people who had previously viewed the institution as irrelevant or anachronistic. The combination of meaningful causes, family reconciliation, and genuine commitment to change had captured imaginations in ways that traditional royal activities never could. The gathering concluded with a joint statement from all family members expressing their commitment to the new direction and their excitement about working together on issues that would make a real difference in people's lives. But, more importantly, it ended with genuine affection and respect between family members who had rediscovered their shared values and common goals. As the family members departed Balmoral, each carried with them a sense of renewed purpose and optimism about the future. The institution that had seemed on the verge of irrelevance just months earlier was now positioned to lead on some of the most important issues of the 21st century, with a united family committed to making their privileged positions count for something meaningful. The transformation was complete, from crisis to opportunity, from division to unity, from tradition for its own sake to tradition in service of urgent human needs. Prince William's bold move had indeed shocked his family and the world, but the ultimate result was a stronger, more relevant, and more united monarchy than anyone had dared to hope for. The House of Windsor had not just survived its greatest internal crisis in modern history, it had emerged transformed and stronger than ever, ready to face the challenges of a new era with confidence and purpose.